Hi, friend. Welcome to Rainy Tailies, a quiet place for gentle stories told beneath the sound of rain. Here, the world slows down for a while. The rain falls softly outside, and we listen to the small moments that often go unnoticed. Memories, letters, thoughts, and dreams. Each story you'll hear tonight is meant to bring calm to your mind and warmth to your heart. So find a cozy spot, let the rain keep you company, and allow your thoughts to drift with the sound. Now, let's begin tonight's story. The rain knocks softly tonight, not with urgency, but with gentleness, like someone too polite to ask for entry, yet too familiar to be a stranger. Outside my window, the world is painted in shades of blue and gray. Each drop traces its path down the glass, making the room feel smaller, safer somehow. The kind of night where silence isn't empty, but full of memory, of breath, of the past echoing through the soft rhythm of the storm. I light a small lamp on my desk. The golden glow flickers just enough to make the shadows stretch slowly across the wooden floor. On the windowsill, a ceramic mug cradles chamomile tea, its steam curling upward in sleepy spirals. The scent is subtle, floral, warm, grounding. I wrap my hands around it, letting the warmth seep into my skin. Like comfort you forgot you needed. Tonight feels like a good night to write. I reach for the old notebook tucked under a stack of weathered journals. Its cover is soft leather, edges worn with time. The pages inside are blank, though they've waited for years. I open it slowly, as if I might wake something sleeping between the pages. Maybe I am got, this is not a story for someone else. There is no audience in mind, no lesson to teach. It is simply a letter. A letter to a girl I used to be. 17. That age feels like a whisper now. A version of me who lived in a body too tight with questions and a heart too soft with hope. She walked quietly through halls, scribbled secrets into the margins of notebooks, and stared out of rain-speckled windows wondering when it would all make sense. She didn't speak much, not because she had nothing to say, but because the words always got stuck in her throat. Like birds afraid to fly into daylight. So I begin, quietly. Dear you, I pause. Even now, it's hard to know where to begin. Not because there's too little to say, but too much. 17 was the year of holding it all in, of pretending to be okay because everyone else seemed louder, sure, brighter. I remember her shoulders, always a little hunched, like she was bracing for a storm that never fully arrived. I remember how she would pull her sleeves over her hands, a kind of small armor. I remember the way she'd watch people laugh from a distance, wondering how they made it look so easy. I want to tell her it's not always easy. For anyone. Some people are just better at wearing masks than others. The rain outside grows a little stronger, a little steadier. I glance up, watching the droplets race down the glass like tiny messengers, each one a memory. That bedroom she sat in, my old room, smelled of old paper and lavender. A lamp in the corner cast soft light on the walls, where postcards and clippings hung like dreams pinned in place. She loved the sound of storms. They made the world quiet enough to hear her own thoughts. And even if she didn't understand them, at least they felt like hers. She didn't know back then that sadness could be soft, that it didn't always arrive screaming or in broken glass, but could slide in gently like the hush that follows a question left unanswered. I wish she'd known it was okay to feel lost, that being unsure wasn't a flaw, just a sign she was still learning. I write to her, slowly. You don't have to figure it all out right now. No one really does. And even those who seem to, they're just good at pretending too. You are not behind. You are not wrong for feeling too much, too fast, or too deeply. You are enough, even in your silence, even when you don't believe it. The tea has cooled. I sip anyway. Its warmth lingers just long enough to soften a knot in my chest. The letter continues gently, honestly. I don't dress the truth in metaphors. I don't tell her it gets better overnight. I tell her it gets different, that she will grow, not just older, but kinder, especially to herself. I tell her that mistakes will come, and they will feel like cliffs, but she will climb out. That her heart will break, and yes, it will ache, but it will also open, wider than she ever thought possible. I tell her that one day she will write a letter to herself on a night like this, and she realize she's still here, that every version of her has survived. The rain eases, as if listening. I close the notebook softly. My hand rests on the cover for a moment longer than needed. There's more to write, more letters to come. But for tonight, this is enough. The shadows stretch farther across the floor now, reaching toward the corners of the room where silence sleeps. I blow out the lamp. The amber glow fades, leaving only the sound of the rain and the soft hum of stillness. And somewhere, in the quiet space between thunder and tea, forgiveness begins. The year I turned 17 was the year I began to vanish. Not in a dramatic sense, not the kind of disappearing that leaves doors swinging open or beds left unmade. It was quieter than that, softer, like fog creeping into a room, barely noticeable until everything looks different. I became skilled at smallness, at folding into myself so gently that no one noticed I wasn't really there. Back then, I would sit by my bedroom window on rainy afternoons, legs pulled close to my chest, chin resting on my knees. The rain was always kindest to me. It never asked questions. It never filled the air with noise I didn't understand. It simply fell again and again, like it had nowhere else to be. And that, to me, felt like love. The room smelled of damp wood and pencil shadings, the kind that lingered after hours of drawing shapes I'd never show anyone. My desk was cluttered with notebooks, most of them filled with half-written stories or poems that never rhymed. I didn't mind. I wasn't trying to impress. I was trying to empty, to take the things inside me and give them somewhere else to live. School was a blur, not painful, just dull around the edges. I walked through hallways like a shadow stitched to the floor. Friends came and went, more out of politeness than closeness. I smiled at the right times, laughed when expected. But inside, I was always watching, always listening for something I couldn't name. I remember one day in particular. It was early spring, and the rain had just begun to fall after a long, dry spell. I was sitting on the back steps of the school, skipping lunch. The clouds above were heavy, swollen with a storm that hadn't yet broken. The air smelled like wet earth and tension. I didn't want to go home. I didn't want to stay. So I did what I always did when I felt like that. I disappeared into stillness. I sat. I breathed. I listened to the faint patter of raindrops on the concrete and imagined what it might be like to be brave. Brave enough to speak, to take up space, to say, I'm not okay, without feeling like I had to apologize for it. But I wasn't brave then. I was 17. And silent. At night, I would lie in bed and press my ear to the pillow, listening to the hum of distant traffic and the occasional roll of thunder. My room, with its slanted ceiling and bookshelf of unread novels, became my cocoon, a place where I could hold myself without needing to explain why. I didn't know then that silence can become a habit, that the longer you keep your words inside, the harder they are to find when you need them. But I also didn't know that silence isn't always a wound. Sometimes it's a kind of waiting, and I was waiting. For what? I wasn't sure. Maybe for someone to notice. Maybe for someone to sit beside me and not ask anything. Just be there. Or maybe I was waiting for the day I would finally notice myself. There was a journal. I kept that year a little black notebook with framed corners and a ribbon bookmark I never used. Its pages were a mess of ink blots and scribbled thoughts, some legible, most not. I wrote things like, I feel like a ghost in my own skin. If I were rain, would I matter more? I want to disappear, but only a little. Just enough so the hurting stops. Reading those words now, I don't feel pity. I feel tenderness. That girl was trying to make sense of a world that often felt too loud. Trying to understand feelings that had no name. Trying to survive in a body that didn't always feel like home. And she did survive. That matters. I remember the music I used to play on my old CD player soft. Melancholic songs with lyrics that wrapped around me like a blanket. I didn't sing along. I just listened. Let the melodies fill the spaces my voice couldn't reach. Sometimes, when the storm outside was strong enough, I would open the window just a crack. Just enough for the rain to slip in and kiss the edge of my desk. I liked the way the air smelled clean, electric, alive. It made me feel part of something bigger than myself. Something ancient, eternal dot. There was comfort in knowing that no matter how invisible I felt, the rain still came. Still danced on rooftops. Still soaked the sidewalks. Still whispered its secrets to anyone quiet enough to hear. I think that's when I first learned the rain could be a friend. Not the kind who talks or fixes things, but the kind who stays. Who sits beside you in silence and says, I see you. Tonight, as I write this, I think of her my 17-year-old self, and I wish I could go back, just for a moment. I wouldn't change her. I wouldn't rush her. I would simply sit beside her on those back steps, offer her a cup of warm tea, and say, You're not broken. You're just blooming slower than most. And that's okay, because not all flowers bloom in spring. Some wait for the rain dot. It was soft from too many washings. A little frayed at the cuffs, with a loose thread hanging just below the collar that I never pulled. That old blue sweater wasn't mine, not originally. It had belonged to my mother, then forgotten at the back of a closet until one chilly autumn afternoon when I found it folded beside a stack of unused scarves. The moment I slipped it on, something inside me sighed. The wool was thick and smelled faintly of cinnamon and soap. It had that worn-in kind of warmth, the kind that doesn't just cover you, but remembers you. The first time I wore was during a thunderstorm in October. I had just gotten home from school. The air was sharp with the first bite of cold, and the clouds outside hung low and heavy. I made myself a cup of ginger tea, my attempt at adulthood, though I always added too much honey and sat by the window in that sweater, watching the storm arrive. The thunder was soft at first, like distant drums rolling over the hills. Then came the rain sudden and strong, tapping the windows with an urgency I hadn't felt in days. I remember curling my legs underneath me, hands around the steaming mug, and thinking, I wish I could stay here forever. And maybe for that afternoon, I did. That sweater came to symbolize something I couldn't name at the time. Safety, maybe. Or softness. Or the kind of quiet love that doesn't ask for attention, but is always there when you reach for it. I wore it on nights when the world felt too loud, when homework piled too high, when friendships felt like balancing acts on too thin wires. I wore it to bed sometimes, even when it was too warm, because it felt like a shield. That blue sweater was with me on a day I now think of often. It was a rainy Sunday, late in November. My mother had baked something sweet apple bread, I think, and the scent filled the house, wrapping itself around corners and seeping into the carpet. I was sitting in the kitchen, wearing the sweater, reading a book I had no real interest in, just wanting to be near her. She was humming to herself, moving between the oven and the sink. The rain outside, tapping a steady rhythm against the window's dot at one point. She paused and looked at me. You know, she said, wiping her hands on a towel, You used to be such a chatterbox, always talking to your dolls, to the rain, to your own shadow. I smiled, shrugged. Guess I ran out of things to say. She didn't laugh. She just tilted her head and said, "I think you still have a lot to say. You're just waiting for someone who listens the right way." That sentence stayed with me for years because I was waiting for someone who didn't rush me, for someone who could sit through my silences without filling them, for someone who understood that sometimes saying nothing was my way of saying everything. I never told her how much that line meant to me. I wish I had. I wore the blue sweater again a week later. The last day I saw my childhood friend, Lily. We'd grown apart by then, 2 rivers drifting in different directions, but we still met for one final walk through the woods behind her house. The leaves had mostly fallen, the sky a dull slate gray. We didn't talk much, just wandered, boots crunching through damp leaves, the silence between us heavier than it used to be. At one point, she reached out and touched my sleeve. "You still wear that old thing?" I looked down. "Yeah, it's kind of like a comfort blanket at this point." She smiled, a little wistfully. "You always did like to hide in soft things." We said goodbye not long after. A half hug, a see you later that we both knew meant never again. I walked home in the rain that afternoon, the sweater soaking through, but still holding me like it understood. Years later, I found it again at the bottom of a drawer in my apartment. I was moving cities, folding clothes into boxes, deciding what to keep and what to leave behind. The sweater was faded now, almost gray, the collar stretched, the hem unraveling. But when I held it, I was 17 again. I was my mother's quiet daughter. I was the girl in the rain. I was the friend who never knew how to say goodbye. I didn't pack it, not because it didn't matter anymore, but because it had already done its job. It had carried me through the years I didn't yet know how to carry myself. Tonight, as the rain murmurs outside and my tea grows cold, I think of that sweater. I think of the version of me who needed it. And I smile, because even though I don't have it anymore, I remember how it felt. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. There are mistakes you make and laugh about a week later, and there are mistakes that build homes inside you. Ones that take root in the quiet corners of your memory and grow vines around your sense of self. I used to think forgiveness was something someone else had to offer me. I didn't know you could spend a lifetime trying to forgive yourself. I was 20 when I first learned how heavy regret could feel, Doc. It wasn't one big moment. No dramatic downfall. Just a slow unraveling choice by choice, silence by silence, until I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize who I had become. I had stopped writing, stopped calling the people who mattered, started nodding along to things I didn't believe in, just to avoid the friction of honesty. There was a boy then. Not a love story, not really. More like a lesson wrapped in charm and timing. He had kind eyes, spoke in metaphors, and made me feel seen for the first time in a long while. I wanted so badly to be someone different when I was with him, braver, wittier, brighter. So I tried. And in doing so, I chipped away at the parts of me that were already too fragile to lose. I told myself little lies to stay close. That I was okay with being second. That I didn't need clarity, only presence. That longing was enough, it wasn't. I remember one night in particular. A dinner party at a friend's flat. Laughter echoing through wine glasses, flickering candles. The smell of rosemary chicken and late summer sweat. He sat beside me, but never once looked at me the way I looked at him. I noticed, and I smiled anyway. When I got home, I cried in the shower until the water ran cold. It wasn't about him. Not really. It was about me. How I'd abandoned myself in pursuit of someone else's approval. After that night, I began writing again. Not stories or poems, just small confessions to myself. I'd scribble them on the backs of receipts, in the margins of lecture notes, on sticky notes I never stuck anywhere. I wrote things like, "You are allowed to walk away. You don't have to be chosen to have value. You are not made to shrink." But knowing something is not the same as believing it. The shame stayed longer than the lesson. For months, I replayed every scene where I had betrayed my own boundaries. I became an expert at self-blame, at replaying the same dialogue with myself. Why didn't you leave sooner? Why did you let it happen? Why weren't you stronger? That voice is cruel, and it sounds so much like truth when you're hurting. But over time, and I mean real time, the kind measured in seasons, not days, that voice softened. It started asking different questions. What were you trying to protect? What did you need in that moment? What would you say to a friend who did the same? The answers surprised me, because I wasn't foolish. I was just hungry for connection. I wasn't weak. I was just tired of holding everything alone. I wasn't broken. I was still building. The rain tonight reminds me of that chapter in my life, the steady, rhythmic kind that lulls instead of lashes. I sip my tea and let the memories come, no longer afraid of their weight. I think of 20-year-old me, standing in the mirror, trying on outfits that didn't feel like her. I think of her listening to playlists that made her cry just to feel something real. I think of the nights she stayed too long in conversations that hollowed her out. And I want to hold her face in my hands and say, "You didn't fail. You were learning. Learning how to draw lines. Learning how to listen to the ache and name it. Learning how to come back to yourself, piece by piece. I don't erase the mistakes. I don't pretend they didn't happen. But I no longer let them define the whole story. Because that version of me lost and longing paved the road to this one." The woman sitting by the window now, wrapped in a blanket that smells faintly of cedar and comfort, writing letters in the hush of rain. She exists because the other did, and survived. Forgiveness didn't come as a moment. It came in layers, Dot. It came in every choice to stay when I wanted to run. In every whispered, "I forgive you," I said into the mirror. And every time I caught myself slipping into old shame and chose, instead, to breathe. Sometimes we carry our mistakes like anchors, thinking they're keeping us grounded. But really, they're just keeping us from moving. Tonight, I let another one go. The rain taps gently on the roof. The steam from my tea curls into the quiet air. And I write one final line in my journal before closing it. You did the best you could with what you knew. And that's enough. It began with glances, the kind that hover for half a second too long and say everything words are too shy to hold. We were both 17, sitting on opposite sides of the same classroom, caught in the rhythm of chalk on board and rain on windows. His name doesn't matter now, not really. What lingers isn't the name, it's the way he looked at me. When the world felt too loud, Dot, he was quiet too. The kind of quiet that wasn't emptiness, but thought. He used to draw in the margins of his notebooks, small sketches of trees, windows, hands. I liked watching his hands move, the way he pressed the pencil softly at first, then darker, deeper, until the image appeared. Sometimes, when the teacher turned, he'd look up, catch my gaze, and smile like he knew I'd been watching. I'd look away, cheeks warm, pretending to take notes. We never called it love. We never even spoke of it. But it lived there, in the small spaces, in the way he'd slide his chair back a little slower when class ended, in how I'd take the long way home just to walk behind him for a few blocks, pretending it was coincidence that it rained a lot that spring, the kind of rain that fell without thunder, soft and steady, turning the world silver. The classroom always smelled of damp books and chalk dust. Sometimes I still remember the sound of it, the rain mixing with the scratch of pencils, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. There was something sacred about that combination, as if the universe knew we were too young to understand the ache of something unspoken, so it gave us silence instead. One afternoon, when the final bell rang and everyone else had left, I stayed behind to collect my things. He lingered too, pretending to organize his papers. The rain had begun again, harder this time, washing the courtyard clean. I don't remember who spoke first. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was the rain. But somehow, we ended up standing by the window together, watching the downpour blur the view outside. "It's beautiful," I said. My voice sounded small in the emptiness. He nodded. "It always is. It's like the world pauses." I turned to him then. His eyes were the color of wet soilworm, grounded. There was a softness in them that made me want to say something honest, something brave. But all I could manage was a smile. He smiled back, and that was enough. For the next few months, we kept orbiting each other in the same quiet way. Notes passed between desks, quotes from books we liked, sketches, song lyrics. I still remember one he drew, a single umbrella under heavy rain, 2 pairs of footprints beneath it. No faces, just presence. He handed it to me one morning, eyes lowered, and I tucked it into my notebook without a word. I carried it for years. We never went to prom. We never confessed. Life moved forward, as it always does, scattering us into different cities, different versions of ourselves. I think he went abroad for college. I stayed close to home. Once, years later, I saw his name in an article online, something about architecture, about designing quiet spaces for people to think. I smiled when I read that. It suited him. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had said something. If I'd told him that he made me feel seen, that his silence made mine softer. But maybe it's better this way. Maybe some love stories aren't meant to unfold. They're meant to remain untouched, like pressed flowers between the pages of a book. Even now, on nights like this, when the rain hums gently outside and the world feels far away, I think of him, of that classroom with fogged windows, of that single umbrella, of 2 people who never spoke the words but understood them anyway. There's a particular kind of peace in remembering something that never broke, because it never had the chance to. It stays pure, unspoiled by time or disappointment. It exists only in memory, suspended in that eternal spring where rain never stops falling and 17 never grows old. I like to think he remembers too. Maybe he hears a song or smells rain on concrete, and for a fleeting second, the years fold in on themselves, and he thinks of the girl who always sat by the window, tracing raindrops with her fingertip. I don't miss him, not really. What I miss is the feeling of possibility, the soft, trembling hope that maybe, just maybe, someone could understand me without needing me to explain. Tonight, as I write this letter, I smile. I write to that younger me, the one too afraid to speak, and I tell her, not every love needs a name. Some are meant to teach you how to see beauty in silence, and some hearts are only meant to pass through you like rain, gentle, necessary and gone too soon. Outside, the rain falls the way it did back then, steady, kind, familiar, and I let it dot. It was the kind of night that made everything feel a little thinner, the veil between the outside and the inside, between memory and now. I was 23, freshly heartbroken, and the world felt like it had been turned inside out. Even the walls of my apartment, once familiar, suddenly felt too tall, too quiet, too indifferent. The storm came late. At first, just a whisper of wind brushing against the windows. Then came the scent, the unmistakable heaviness in the air. It tells you the sky is about to let go. I stepped out onto the small balcony, wrapped in a cardigan that wasn't quite warm enough, barefoot against the cool tiles. I didn't know why I went out there. I think some part of me wanted the rain to come, needed it to come, and when it did, I didn't move. I stood there, still and aching, as the rain broke open above me, heavy and wild. No rhythm, no grace. Just the rawness of water falling from a sky that couldn't hold it anymore. And in that chaos, something inside me cracked. Quietly, Dot, I started to cry. Not the soft, cinematic kind of tears. Not the ones you can blink away or catch with the sleeve of your sweater. These were the kind that came from the gut. That made your shoulders shake and your breath stumble. The kind of crying that feels like unraveling, but no one saw because the rain was louder. It cloaked everything. My tears blended with it so perfectly that if someone had looked from a distance, they wouldn't have known the difference. The rain was my cover, my confession booth, my companion. I cried for the version of me who believed in forever, for the trust I had offered like a gift, only to watch it be returned in pieces. I cried for the late-night texts and early morning silences, for the promises that dissolved as soon as the seasons changed. I cried for how I had made myself smaller, again, just to fit inside someone else's idea of love. I cried until my hair clung to my face and my cardigan hung heavy on my skin. And still, the rain kept falling. There's something healing in being allowed to fall apart without an audience, to shatter in silence, knowing the world is too busy spinning to notice. That night gave me that. No demands, no expectations, just spaced out. Eventually, I sat down, right there on the wet balcony floor, back pressed against the wall, my knees drawn up, arms around myself. The tiles beneath me were slick and cold, grounding in a way nothing else had been in weeks. In the distance, a train passed, the low rumble weaving through the storm like a distant heartbeat. Somewhere below, a dog barked once, then went quiet. And above it all, the rain kept singing its lullaby. I don't remember how long I sat there, Dot. Time loses its shape when you're grieving. But when I finally stood up, soaked to the bone, shivering but strangely lighter, I whispered something to the night. Thank you. Not for the pain, not for the ending, but for the rain, for the way it held me without holding me, for the way it let me cry without judgment, for the way it reminded me that even skies have limits and that it's okay to break when you've held too much for too long. I dried off in the dark, too tired to turn on the light, wrapped myself in a blanket and lay on the couch, not bothering to change. I fell asleep to the sound of water dripping from the balcony railing, my body heavy, but my heart slightly softer. Dot, in the days that followed, I didn't speak much of that night, but something shifted. I no longer felt the need to pretend. I let myself feel without apology. I stopped editing my grief for other people's comfort, and when it rained again a few weeks later, I didn't hide from it. I opened my window. I sat with it, and I let it remind me, tears are not a weakness. They're just a form of rain too. Now, years later, I think of that night often, not with sorrow, but with reverence. It was the night I broke and wasn't broken. The night I cried and wasn't ashamed. The night I remembered I was human, fragile, and whole. So tonight, I write this letter to the version of me who wept on the balcony, trying to hold her own heart together. You were not weak. You were just honest. And the rain understood you in ways no one else could. I'm proud of you for letting it all fall, for trusting that something would remain when the storm passed. Outside, the rain has returned gentler now, like a friend knocking quietly, and I let it in. There's a small box tucked away at the back of my closet. It's old, one of those weathered cardboard ones that once held a pair of ankle boots I wore for exactly one autumn. The corners are a little crushed now, the lid softened from being opened and closed many times. Inside are folded papers, yellowed envelopes, and scraps of thought. They're not organized, not labeled, not even sealed. Just fragments of words. Pieces of myself I once needed to speak, but never dared to send. These are the letters that never found a recipient. Some are addressed. Others begin with no name. Just a wave of emotion, strong enough to press pen to paper. One of the oldest is from my father Dot. It starts simply, "I don't know what to say to you anymore." I remember writing that one on a late December night, sitting on the floor beside the heater in the living room of my childhood home. The Christmas tree was still up, lights blinking gently, casting colored shadows across the walls. He had fallen asleep on the couch again, television humming low, a beer bottle half empty on the table. And I was angry, not because he was cruel, but because he was absent, even when he was right there. I wrote pages that night about how I missed the version of him from the few memories I had teaching me to ride a bike, carrying me in his arms after I fell. I wrote about the quiet that had grown between us, like moss on a stone wall, slow and persistent. About how I wished he would ask me something real. About how I stopped asking him anything years ago, but I never gave him that letter. I folded it up and placed it in the box instead, not because he didn't deserve to hear it, but because I didn't need him to carry it. It was enough that I had put the weight down. Another letter, softer in tone, is to my older sister. She moved out when I was 15, chasing a life that looked nothing like the one we grew up in. I envied her for that, for her courage, her hunger, her refusal to stay. We lost touch slowly. Not in anger, just in time. Her letter begins. "Do you remember the night we stayed up till sunrise, just talking?" I wrote it after I dreamed of her one rainy morning. In the dream, we were children again, hiding under a blanket fort, whispering about our futures, like they were faraway stars we'd eventually catch. When I woke up, I missed her so much it hurt. I told her things in that letter I never said aloud, that I admired her, even when she scared me, that her strength had once made me feel small, but now gave me something to reach toward, that I forgave her for leaving, that I hoped she had found peace. I folded it carefully. It still smells faintly of rosewater and ink. And then there are the letters. I wrote to myself. So many, scattered across years, like breadcrumbs back to places I've tried to forget. Letters written after breakups, after funerals, after sleepless nights where doubt curled itself around my ankles and wouldn't let go. Some begin with frustration. "You should know better by now." Others with grace. "You are trying, and that is enough." One, written on a napkin at a train station, says only, "Come home to yourself." That's the only journey that matters. I used to think letters needed an audience, that they were incomplete without someone to receive them. But I've learned that sometimes the writing is the receiving. That getting the words out is the whole point. That closure isn't about replies. It's about release. Each letter in that box is a weight lifted, a chapter acknowledged, a kindness offered to a younger version of me who didn't know how to speak yet. Tonight, I pull the box out again, not to read, just to touch, to remind myself that there is value in what we feel, even if no one else ever sees it. I add a new one, a letter to all the people I never dared to ask for help. It's short. "I'm sorry I never let you in. I was afraid you'd see the mess and leave. But I know now kindness doesn't flinch. Thank you, anyway, for being there even when I couldn't say I needed you." I fold it, place it on top. The rain taps gently against the window. My tea has gone cold again, but I don't mind. The room feels full, not with noise, but with presence, with memory, with softness. These letters may never reach the hands they were written for, but they've already done their work. They've built a bridge between who I was and who I'm becoming. And that's enough. It was a Wednesday, late September. The sky had been brooding since morning, clouds thick and heavy like a woolen blanket stretched across the rooftops. I was walking without a destination, just trying to move through the ache that had settled in my chest over the past few days, one of those aches that didn't have a name. Only wait got the first raindrops fell as I turned the corner of a quiet street, the kind lined with trees and old brick buildings that seemed to breathe in the rain. I didn't have an umbrella. I rarely did. Part of me liked the idea of getting caught in the rain. It made the world feel a little more alive and me a little more visible, as if nature itself was reaching out to touch me. That's when I saw the bookstore dot. It was small, tucked between a shuttered cafe and a laundromat humming behind foggy windows. A hand-painted sign above the door read Willow and Words. The windows were fogged up, soft yellow light glowing from within. A bell chimed as I stepped inside. The smell hit me, first dust and paper, lavender, and something faintly woody like cedar. The space was quiet, filled with the soft murmur of rain against glass and a jazz record playing somewhere in the back. Shelves towered up around me, crooked and charming, books stacked in cozy disorder. It felt less like a store and more like someone's memory dot. And then I saw her dot. An elderly woman sat behind the counter, wrapped in a knitted shawl the color of rain clouds, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. Her silver hair was gathered in a loose braid over her shoulder, and she wore reading glasses low on her nose. She looked up as I entered, and for a moment, we just smiled at each other, two strangers sharing the warmth of a storm. "Take your time," she said, voice soft as felt. "Rain gives us permission to linger." I wandered the aisles, fingers trailing along spines, pulling out covers that spoke to me. Poetry collections, old love letters, essays on growing older, books about silence, about belonging, about letting go. Dot in the far back corner, I found a worn armchair and a small table stacked with forgotten titles. I sat, flipping through a book of letters written by people who had never met. It felt fitting, like some quiet echo of my own box of unsent words. The woman brought me a cup of tea without asking. Chamomile, just the way I liked it. I didn't question how she knew. Some people carry knowing in their bones. She sat across from me, settling into a rocking chair that creaked in a familiar, comforting way. "It's a lovely book," she said, nodding at the one in my lap. "There's something sacred about a letter, don't you think? It's like handing someone your breath." I nodded, unsure what to say. The silence between us didn't need to be filled. After a moment, she spoke again. "Do you write?" I hesitated, then answered honestly. "I used to. Now I just think a lot." She smiled. Thinking is writing that hasn't found its paper yet. I didn't know it then, but that line would stay with me for years. We didn't talk much more. Just sat together, sipping tea, letting the rain drum softly around us. I don't remember her name. She never asked for mine. But before I left, she pressed a small card into my hand. On it was a quote, handwritten in neat, looping cursive. "You are allowed to start again, as many times as you need." I thanked her quietly and stepped back into the world, rain still falling, but feeling somehow gentler. That bookstore stayed in my memory like a dream you keep returning to. A place stitched into the fabric of a rainy afternoon. I never found it again, though I looked. The sign, the street, even the laundromat seemed to vanish. But the warmth remained. The truth remained. Sometimes healing doesn't come with a grand realization or a perfectly timed revelation. Sometimes it comes in a cup of tea, a stranger's kindness, a book that opens something inside you you'd forgotten was closed. Tonight, I write a letter to that woman, real or imagined. It doesn't matter. Thank you for reminding me that even in my quietest moments, I am not alone. That words matter. That rain is not just weather, it's invitation. And that sometimes the gentlest places live only in memory, and that's enough. Outside, the storm has softened to a hush. The kind that says, linger a little longer, so I do. By the time I turned 30, the world no longer felt like something I had to run through. My 20s had been a blur of rushing toward love, success, meaning, approval. I had measured time by deadlines and mistakes, friendships gained and lost, the number of unread messages blinking back at me. I was always chasing something, or maybe fleeing from something else. But 30 arrived like a soft knock on the door on a rainy afternoon. That afternoon, in fact, was exactly that. The sky was a moody charcoal, clouds hanging low as if they too were tired. Rain had started falling mid-morning, slow and rhythmic. The kind of rain that doesn't ask for attention. It simply stays. I didn't have anywhere to be. No one waiting. No plan beyond making myself a cup of tea. I boiled the kettle and stood by the window, watching the wind tease the branches of the tree outside. The leaves had just begun to turn, the first signs of fall creeping into the edges of summer. I wrapped my hands around the mug, breathing in the scent lemongrass and honey, my favorite, and moved to the kitchen table. The house was quiet. No music, no phone buzzing, no television murmuring in the background. Just the hum of rain on the roof and the occasional low rumble of thunder rolling in from a distance. I didn't realize how much I needed the silence until I sat down in the middle of it. On the table, a book lay open to a dog-eared page. I'd read it before twice, actually, but something about rereading familiar words on a rainy day felt like a kind of ceremony. A reminder that not all things need to be new to be nourishing. Some things, some moments are meant to be returned to, like a warm sweater or an old lullaby. As I read, I found myself smiling not at anything in particular, just at the feeling of being still, of having nowhere to go and nothing to prove. I looked around the room at the chipped mug, the overwatered plant by the windowsill, the candle half burned to its base, and felt a strange, overwhelming affection for the life I'd built. Imperfect as it was, I thought of the girl I used to be, the one who believed joy had to be loud and shining, who waited for grand moments, for fireworks and applause. She didn't yet understand that joy could be soft, that it could live in a sip of tea, in the hush after thunder, in the steady breath of solitude. That afternoon, I didn't need answers. I didn't need anything to change. I just needed to be. And somehow, that was more than enough. There's a specific kind of joy that comes not from excitement, but from ease. A joy that feels like a blanket pulled up to your chin. Like the first page of a new journal. Like someone resting their hand on yours without needing to say a word. That's the joy I felt that day. And I've learned to chase that kind of joy ever since. Not in noise, but in quiet. Not in movement, but in rest. Not in seeking more, but in seeing what's already here. Tonight, as the rain returns to its steady rhythm outside, I make the same tea. Lemongrass and honey. The mug is different now, and the kitchen is in a different house, but the feeling is the same. I sit by the window, wrapped in a blanket, and write this letter to myself at 30. You are learning to love the silence. And in doing so, you are learning to love yourself. Not the self you showed to the world, but the self who brewed tea in the quiet and smiled without needing a reason. A soft crack of thunder rolls through the evening. I close the journal and lean back, eyes heavy with comfort. Somewhere deep inside, I know this is joy, not the kind that dances. The kind that sits beside you and stays. It's strange how courage can vanish so quietly. Not like a door slamming shut or a voice yelling no, more like a soft withdrawing, a quiet stepping back. One day, you wake up and realize the part of you that once said go, now whispers maybe later. This letter is for the version of me who used to be brave. I remember her. She wasn't loud, but she was sure. She'd raise her hand in class even when her voice trembled. She'd walk into rooms where she didn't know anyone and sit down anyway. She'd say yes to things before fear had the chance to build its walls. But somewhere along the way, she faded. I don't blame her. Life has a way of wearing us down slowly, persistently. A rejection here, a disappointment there, a dream deferred, a comment taken too deeply. Each one small, but together they accumulate like drops of water hollowing stone. I remember the day I didn't apply for the fellowship I'd spent months preparing for. I had written the essays, gathered the references, bookmarked the deadline. And then, on the final morning, I simply didn't do it. I told myself I was too tired, that I wasn't qualified, that someone else would need it more. But the truth was simpler. I was afraid of being told. I wasn't enough dot, so I buried the dream. There was the trip to Kyoto I never booked. The open mic night I didn't attend. The conversation I didn't start. The apology I didn't offer. The door I didn't open. Small choices maybe, but together they built a pattern of retreat-courage. I've learned isn't always grand. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quietest voice at the end of the day saying, try again tomorrow. But back then, I wasn't listening to that voice. I was listening to fear, the kind that wears familiar clothes, that pretends to protect you by keeping you small. Fear became my compass. And for a while, I mistook safety for peace, until I realized they weren't the same. Peace doesn't make you shrink. I wish I could go back and hold that version of me, the one sitting alone in her room, scrolling past the Apply Now button, pretending it didn't matter. I'd take her hand and say, it's okay to be scared, but do it anyway. Shake if you must, but don't sit still. Courage is not the absence of fear, it's the decision to move despite it. I'm not angry at her. I understand her now. She was trying to protect her softest parts. She had been burned before, laughed at, overlooked. She just wanted to avoid one more bruise. That makes sense. But still, I miss her. The girl who tried dot, so I've started small. Saying yes to invitations I'd usually decline. Speaking up when I'd rather stay quiet. Making plans without knowing the outcome. It's clumsy, this reclaiming. But every small act is a kind of homecoming. Tonight, I light a candle beside my journal and write a note not to the past, but to the present. Dear Courage, I thought I lost you. But maybe you are just waiting for me to stop apologizing for being afraid. I'm ready now. Come back slowly if you must. I'll be here with open hands. The candle flickers. The rain taps gently at the window, steady and grounding. I breathe in the soft scent of lavender and wax. And I smile. I am not fearless, but I am still reaching. And maybe that's what courage really is. There was a garden behind the house I grew up in, small, uneven, half-wild. My mother called it hers, though she always said it belonged more to the rain than to her. I remember the narrow stone path winding through rows of hydrangeas and old rosebush, the patch of herbs in one corner, and the stubborn ivy that kept climbing the fence, no matter how many times we trimmed it back out as a child. I spent hours there, digging, planting, waiting. I used to believe that if I spoke softly enough to the soil, it would listen, that my whispers could coax the seeds into growing faster. And sometimes it felt like they did. I hadn't been back in years, but one spring just before my 35th birthday, I returned. The house had long been sold, but the new owners were kind enough to let me walk the grounds one quiet morning. They didn't ask questions when I knocked. I told them I used to live there, and that I'd left something behind I needed to say goodbye to. They smiled, as if they understood. The yard had changed. The paint on the shed had peeled. The fence leaned to one side. The ivy had claimed more than its fair share. But the garden, though untamed, was still there. I walked the stone path slowly, leaves brushing my ankles, the air damp with last night's rain. Some of the plants had gone wild. Others hadn't bloomed in years. But in one corner, near the base of the tree where I used to hang wind chimes, I found something unexpected. A flower, a single pale blue iris, blooming stubbornly through the overgrowth dot. I stood there for a long time, staring at it. It felt like a secret only I was meant to find. And in that moment, I understood something. Healing is like a garden. Sometimes you plant the seeds with care, intentional, hopeful, and wait for them to grow. But sometimes you plant without knowing. You drop something in act of kindness, a difficult goodbye, a memory you couldn't carry anymore. And years later, without warning, it blooms, even after neglect, even in chaos, even without sunlight. Some gardens wait for you. That iris was a message, quiet but clear. You haven't lost everything. Some things have simply been waiting for you to return. I knelt down and touched its petals. They were soft, trembling slightly in the morning breeze. I wanted to cry, but didn't. Not out of resistance, but reverence. It felt like the wrong time to cry. It felt like a time to listen. I whispered a thank you dot, not just to the flower, but to the girl I used to be, the one who loved with no guarantee of blooming, who planted even when she was told nothing would grow. I had left parts of myself in that garden, and now, in a way, they were greeting me. That afternoon, I wrote a letter to her. You didn't fail. You were just early. You planted more than you knew. And the garden remembered, even when you forgot. Since then, I've started planting again. Small pots on my windowsill, herbs in the kitchen, a few wildflowers in the corner of my balcony. Nothing grand, just quiet acts of hope. Dirt under my nails, the scent of wet earth, the steady rhythm of watering. It's not about the blooms anymore. It's about the care, the presence, the patience. And sometimes, when I'm still, I think about that garden behind the old house. I imagine the wind moving through the ivy, the soft creak of the gate, the iris standing alone like a hymn. I know it may not be there anymore, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that once, something waited for me to come back. And when I did, it was still blooming. My grandmother used to say that the rain was a storyteller, that if you listened closely, you could hear it whispering old tales of lost loves, quiet braveries, and dreams tucked under pillows. As a child, I believed her completely. I'd press my ear to the window pane during storms, eyes closed, trying to decipher the words hidden in the rhythm of falling water. She was the first person I ever loved without condition. Her name was Min, but everyone called her Ba Ongoi. She smelled of star anise and peppermint oil, and her voice carried the weight of generations, gentle, steady, like rain on a tin roof. When I stayed over at her house, especially on stormy nights, she would make ginger tea and pull me close beneath a faded cotton blanket. We'd sit on the floor by the open window, listening to the storm roll through the sky like an old song finding its chorus. Listen, she'd whisper. The rain remembers everything. At the time, I didn't understand what she meant, but I nodded anyway, warmed by her nearness, soothed by her certainty. I thought the rain was just wet and noisy. She made it sacred. Her stories were simple, not fairy tales, never dragons or castles. Instead, she spoke of real things. The first time she saw snow in France, how she made soup from nothing but bones and kindness during hard years, the smell of the Mekong after the rain. She spoke of silence like it was a friend, of waiting like it was an art, of love as something you grow, not something you find. When I lost her, it rained, not a storm, just a quiet, persistent drizzle that lingered for days. The kind of rain that clings to window panes and coats your coat, your skin, your grief. I remember walking through the cemetery with my hands in my pockets, rain sliding down my face, mixing with tears I didn't bother to wipe away. That night, I made ginger tea, sat by the window, and waited. For her voice, Dot, it didn't come in words, not exactly. But there was something in the hush of the storm that felt familiar. Like the soft rustle of her hands folding laundry, like the creak of her rocking chair, like the sound of her breath, slow and steady, beside mine as I drifted to sleep as a child. Since then, every time it rains, I feel her return. She's not a ghost. She's not a memory, either, not just that. She's presence. She's the quiet instinct that reminds me to slow down, to listen, to hold grief with both hands and not apologize for it. She's the voice in me that says, you are not alone, even when no one else is in the room. One evening, not long ago, I found a recording she had made on an old cassette tape, her telling a lullaby in Vietnamese. Her voice was softer than I remembered, but unmistakably hers. I sat on the floor, rain tapping gently on the windows again, and let her lull me back into a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. Dot, it was like being 5 again, wrapped in a warm blanket, the world outside roaring, while she whispered me safely into dreams. I write this letter for her now. Dear Ba Ngawi, I miss you. Not just your stories, but your pauses. The way you made silence feel like an answer. The way your hands always knew when to hold and when to let go. I hope you know the rain still carries your voice. I still listen. I still remember. I still wait for your softness in the storm. Tonight, the sky is heavy again. The first drops are tapping against the roof, like fingers finding an old piano tune. I make ginger tea, light a small candle, pull a blanket over my shoulders, and I listen, because she was right. The rain does. Remember everything. There's a mirror in my bedroom. Its simple wooden frame, slightly scratched at the corners, leaning gently against the wall rather than home. I bought it in my 20s, thinking one day I'd mount it properly. I never did. But over the years, it has seen every version of me. Rushing, aching, looming, breaking, for a long time. I avoided it, not always in obvious ways, just little ones. Standing at an angle, looking only from the shoulders up, turning off the light when I changed clothes. I told myself I didn't care about appearances, that the reflection didn't matter. But the truth is, it did. Not because of beauty, but because I couldn't meet my own eyes. There was always a narrative playing in my mind. Not yet. Not quite, almost. If only Dot. If only I were more outgoing. If only I were thinner. If only I could speak up more. If only I could do everything without ever needing help. I lived under the weight of those if-onlys for so long that I forgot to ask who gave them to me in the first place. Some of them came from childhood. The way praise was always linked to achievement. How being good meant being quiet. How love felt conditional, even when it wasn't. Some came from culture, from media, from the endless scroll of curated lives and filtered joy. But most of them, I see now, were carved by my own hands. Slowly, quietly, until one day, I stopped. It wasn't a grand transformation. Not a moment of epiphany. Just a quiet, tired decision. I stood in front of the mirror one evening, fresh from the shower, hair still damp, face bare. I didn't pose, didn't adjust the light. I just stood there and looked, not to judge, not to correct, just to see. And I whispered something that surprised me. You're still here. That was it. That was the beginning. From there, the conversations grew. I started saying things I'd never dared to before. You have carried so much. You are not too much. And you are not enough. You don't have to earn rest. You don't have to be useful to be worthy. At first, these words felt foreign, like trying on someone else's coat warm, but not quite mine. But over time, they settled, became familiar, became true. I started noticing softness in places I once only saw flaws. The way my hands, though small, had comforted friends in the middle of their storms. The way my voice, though quiet, had steadied others when they were afraid. The way my eyes crinkled when I laughed, as if joy had left fingerprints behind. These things matter. These things are enough. Tonight, the mirror still leans in its same quiet corner, and I stand in front of it again, wrapped in a sweater I've worn too many times, mug of warm milk in my hands. The rain taps gently on the window, steady and forgiving. I look at myself, not the girl I was, not the woman I hope to be. Just me, as I am, and I smile, not because everything is perfect, but because I am learning to stay with myself when I feel lost, to stay in the moment, even when it aches, to stay at the table instead of leaving at the first sign of discomfort, to stay in my own skin, not waiting to be someone else, not wishing to be more. I write this letter tonight for all the versions of me who believed they had to be better to be loved. You are enough, not when you achieve more, not when you fix everything, not when they say you are. You are enough now, as you breathe, as you break, as you begin again. Outside, the rain hums like an old lullaby dot, and inside, I whisper it too softly, over and over until I believe it. I was always enough. Some nights arrive without warning, but carry the quietness of a conclusion. Not an ending, exactly, but a settling. A soft folding of old pages. A breath you didn't know you'd been holding for years. Thought it was one of those nights. The rain had begun earlier than expected late afternoon, while the sky was still lit with silver and blue. I had just finished cleaning the kitchen, hands pruny from dishwater, when I heard the first gentle patter on the window pane. By the time the sun dipped behind the clouds, the whole house was wrapped in the hush of falling rain. I didn't turn on any lights. I made a cup of tea, jasmine this time, and lit a single candle. The soft flame flickered against the darkening walls as I settled into the armchair by the window, knees drawn up, blanket across my lap. No music, no distractions. Just the rain and me, and a quiet I hadn't welcomed in a long time. That evening, something felt different. There was no sorrow, no looming thought chasing at the edges. Just stillness, just presence, the kind of peace that only comes when you've stopped trying to escape. And maybe that's what made the memory come dot. It wasn't dramatic. Just a thought, sudden and full-bodied. I've been too hard on myself. The words dropped into me like a stone into water, rippling for years. I had held on to old guilt like a keepsake, carefully folded mistakes tucked into the corners of my memory. Moments I couldn't forget. The phone call I didn't return. The apology I gave too late. The job I walked away from. The words I said in anger. The silence I offered when someone needed more. I had worn them like weights, believing they were mine to carry. That night, as the rain softened against the windows, I thought about forgiveness, not as a gift for others, but for myself. I remembered how I used to flinch at my own reflection, how I'd replay conversations, months later, with an ache in my chest, how I would write letters I never sent, not to heal, but to punish, to remind myself of how I could have done better. But what if I had done the best I could with what I knew at the time? What if I stopped measuring myself by hindsight? The candle flickered. A drop of tea slipped from the rim of my mug onto my hand, warm and grounding. I set the cup down and leaned back, letting the thought take shape. You don't owe the past anything more than gentleness. I whispered it aloud. voice barely above the rain. I forgive you. And I meant it, not in a sweeping, cinematic way. There was no flood of tears, no cinematic catharsis, just a quiet nod to all the versions of me who had tried, failed, loved, hurt, who had walked through fire and still sat here, listening to the rain dot. I forgave the girl who trusted too quickly, the woman who stayed too long in places that dimmed her, the friend who didn't know how to show up sometimes, the daughter who needed more than she knew how to ask for. I forgave the hesitation, the overthinking, the trying too hard, the not dash trying dash at dash all dot, and in doing so, I made room for breath, for ease, for the kind of joy that doesn't have to be earned. I picked up my journal, the one with pages smudged from years of confessions, and wrote only one sentence. Tonight, I came home to myself. Then I closed it. The rain continued, soft and steady. Somewhere in the distance, a wind chime sang. The candle danced. And I sat there, not needing to fix anything, not wishing to go back or forward, just being. For the first time in a long time, that was enough. I didn't sleep right away. But when I did, it was deep and dreamless. The kind of sleep that follows release, that carries no weight, that lets the body rest and the heart breathe. I write this now to remember it, to remind myself. Forgiveness is not about erasing the past. It's about laying it down. It's about saying, I did the best I could, and that's all anyone can ever do. The rain tonight sounds the same, but I am different, and that is the miracle. There's something sacred about the last page of a letter. It's where the voice softens, where the heart exhales, where you say not just goodbye, but thank you. This isn't a letter to my younger self anymore. It's a letter to you, back to the person listening now, perhaps curled under a blanket, or walking slowly through a rainy street. Maybe you're in bed, trying to quiet your thoughts. Maybe you're staring at the ceiling in the soft dark, wondering if anyone else has ever felt this quiet ache that doesn't quite have a name. I don't know your story, but I know what it's like to carry unsent words in your chest, to wonder if you're too much or not enough, to rewrite moments in your head at night, wishing you could go back and say something different or say anything at all. I know what it's like to miss someone who is still alive, to grieve the things that never happened, to look at your reflection and feel like a stranger. And I know what it's like to long for rest, for belonging, for something gentle to hold on to when the world feels too sharp. So let me say this from the quiet of my room, with the rain whispering outside and the light low and golden. If you're listening, I'm here. I don't have the answers. I still forget to drink enough water, still doubt myself in quiet corners, still flinch when old thoughts knock at the door. But I've learned that showing up, even imperfectly, is still an act of grace. You don't need to become someone else to be worthy. You don't need to earn rest or joy or love. You don't need to explain your sadness to deserve softness. You don't need to hide your healing just because it's not complete. You are allowed to take your time to grow in the shadows, to begin again, even if you've done so 100 times already. Tonight, if your heart feels heavy, let it be. Heavy things are often precious, and if you feel hollow, let the rain fill you. Let it sing against your windows. Let it remind you that even the sky breaks open sometimes. And still, it is beautiful. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not alone. You are becoming, and becoming is not a straight line. It curves, it folds, it loops back on itself. Sometimes it rests. Sometimes it returns. But always, always it moves forward. If you feel like no one sees you right now, let me say, I see you. I see the quiet kindness you offer, even when no one notices. I see the way you keep showing up, even when you're tired. I see the softness in you that hasn't hardened, despite everything. I see the strength it takes to listen to your own heart, to sit still with yourself, to choose peace over noise. So let this be a kind of letter tucked into your pocket. A note from someone you've never met, but who understands something about the shape of your silence. Let this be a door left open, a porch light left on. Let this be your reminder that you don't have to walk it alone. Tonight, I'm holding space for you, for all your beginnings, for all your remembering, for all your quiet hope. And when the rain stops, as it always does, may you feel a little lighter. May you close your eyes and sleep, not as an escape, but as a return. May you dream gently. May you wake softly. And may you carry this with you. You are worthy. You are enough. And you are loved right here. As you are, good night.